small nation Sri Lanka was offered approximately $8 billion by China as a part of the One Belt, One Road initiative to build what it thought was going to be a flagship port which would bring prosperity to the south of the nation. That dream quickly turned into a nightmare of spiraling debt, with the result that in 2017, Sri Lanka was forced to hand over one of their major southern ports to the Chinese government. We're bringing you three arguments in this debate. One, that this is economically problematic for the countries on the road. Two, that this increases China's global influence in a negative way. And three, that this solidifies dictators or repressive governments' hold on power. What do we mean when we talk about the One Belt, One Road initiative? We mean the enormous Chinese foreign direct investment project to rebuild the ancient Silk Road trading routes. China plans to invest, by some estimates, up to $900 billion in countries along the old Silk Road. What's our stance in this debate? One, we believe the Belt and Road Initiative has been and will continue to be counterproductive and harmful to the world. Two, we support domestic infrastructure projects and we support the use of foreign aid and funding to fund those projects, but we do not believe China should be a major protagonist or indeed an influential actor in that process. Three, we support multilateral loans from organizations like the Asian Development Bank, the EU, the US, the IMF, the European Investment Bank. My first argument is about how it's economically damaging to countries on the road. Look, we can see that in the very short term, it might make economic sense for some of these countries to take Chinese loans. But in the long run, it's almost always problematic for smaller countries along the road, in Central Asia, in Southeast Asia, and in Africa. Whilst it's often perceived or portrayed by the Chinese government as free aid or loans designed to help these countries, it's actually a far more nefarious attempt to claim other things from them. We tell you that China exploits countries by giving loans it knows they won't be able to pay back. So whereas the Asian Development Bank, the US, the EU, the African Development Bank demand certain things economically from countries they invest in, like stable banking markets, like transparent financial industries, like limited corruption, like political stability, usually in the form of democracy, we tell you that's a good thing, because countries that lack the political or economic structures to become viable recipients of loans won't benefit from those loans in the first place. All those requirements help provide governments and incentivize governments to develop economies to the point when the loans that they get will be effectively used in those economies. By contrast, 1/3 of the countries that China have given loans to have been identified by the IMF of being in a high state of debt distress. Now, that's no coincidence. China actively seeks out and targets countries which won't pay back loans so that when they're unable to, it's able to demand a whole host of other things which prioritize Chinese interests over the long-term economic, social, and political development of those countries. What does that look like? One, it looks like the projects they're used for having to be built by Chinese contractors, like the railway between Djibouti and Ethiopia, funded and built entirely by Chinese contractors. So not only are these countries getting themselves into debt, which they have to pay interest on, half the money they get from China, they have to give straight back to China in the first place so that they build these loans. So China gives Djibouti $814 million and then demands that they give $400 million right back to China, and Djibouti are left with an $814 million bill plus interest, whereas China are left with a railway, a port, and owning all of that Djiboutian debt. Two, if they can't repay these loans, China takes control of major infrastructure projects with significant economic and national security value, like the port of Athens that was given up by Greece to China in repayment for China's loans, like mines in Angola which are today owned by China as a result of the fact that China has demanded them from those countries. Look, they're basically the international equivalent of loan sharks, guys, but that's not all. There are a number of economic disadvantages that accrue when countries are invested in by China. A, many of these projects are doomed to fail. Because they demand Chinese contractors who don't have local knowledge or experience of the communities or conditions in which they're working, these projects often never finish and the countries are left with a substantial amount of debt and nothing to show for it. In Pakistan, the Karachi Rail Project, the Gwadar Airport, the Dimabasa Dam cost a total of $22 billion, but not one of them was finished, and yet Pakistan had to repay those loans regardless. The projects which do succeed, and of course some do, are the ones which further China's ability to control those countries. The projects which don't are the ones which would actually benefit the individuals in those countries. That's why Pakistan have literally rejected more aid and said they'll build the dam themselves because they've had enough of being exploited by China. Before I talk to you about why the One Belt, One Road initiative increases China's influence in the world in a problematic way, I'll take a point of information.
The greatest threat to freedom is when people on the ground don't have jobs, don't have electricity, don't have roads, and don't have money. How does your side solve this problem?
Ed's going to talk to you in his speech about the way that China, as compared to the international community gives loans, actually entrenches the interests of illiberal powers. But basically, because China has no incentive to encourage democratization, to encourage pushes towards liberalization in a way that other international organizations do, China doesn't require those things from dictators. Instead, it just gives them big white elephant projects that they can distract their populaces with while they continue to oppress them. Let's talk about how the One Belt, One Road initiative increases China's influence in a problematic way. First thing to note here is that China is a bad actor. A, China is effectively a dictatorship, and President Xi has ensured that he will be in power for at least the foreseeable future. B, China consistently suppresses political and social dissident internally. And 3, China persistently abstains or vetoes resolutions in the United Nations that would harm repressive regimes like Syria, like Zimbabwe, like Myanmar. We are principally against an actor as repugnant as this gaining more power globally. And we think that it's only as a consequence of China's global influence that people so often overlook how illiberal and how repressive it is. So the thing to note here is that the One Belt, One Road policy is the most ambitious policy to increase China's global influence. We've shown you why that's not something you should support. A, because as a condition for the economic loans that it provides under this system, it demands political support from the countries that it provides those loans to. For every 10% more times that African nations vote alongside China in the United Nations, they receive, on average, an 83% increase in the amount of aid they get. So, surprise, surprise, in 2005, when the United Nations voted on expanding the Security Council, which we think would have been a great thing, it was African nations who prevented that from happening because China didn't want Japan getting a veto. The second mechanism here is that China uses the Belt and Road Initiative to gain support for aggressive foreign policy objectives, which it has. Papua New Guinea was economically forced into, for the first time, officially recognizing China's legitimacy in the South China Sea in 2016 as a result of the incredible stranglehold that China had over the economy of Papua New Guinea. They have their finger on the jugular of these countries, and they can use that to pressure them into giving international support for their policies and to controlling their economies. Overall, all of the steps that China has taken to increase the influence, its own influence, using a One Belt, One Road policy, have made the world a worse place. We think the world would be better off if these countries used multilateral, international, or domestic funding for infrastructure projects. So, because we've shown you how, one, when countries accept Chinese loans under the One Belt, One Road initiative, that is actually worse off for those countries in the long run, and two, how China is using this as a soft power initiative to gain more international prestige, I beg you to propose.
So proposition talks a good game about sovereignty and democracy. But the greatest threat to all of this is when people are trapped by the shackles of poverty. Recognize the BRI is the reason why locals in Pakistan, Kazakhstan, and Thailand have jobs, money, electricity, and schools for the first time. That alone is a good thing. What is our stance in opposition? First, we support the BRI. This means we support a system where China provides developing countries with low-interest loans that allow them to build a basic infrastructure like power grids, highways, and airports. Second, of course, we may also support countries getting loans from multilateral lenders like the World Bank, which is exactly that policy. But there is obviously a reason why many countries are turning to the BRI, because Western loans are either A, simply not enough, B, charge far higher interests, or C, come attached with strict conditionalities that privilege only Western interests. We're going forward to your arguments. First, that the BRI creates economic development. Second, that it prevents Chinese aggression. And third, in our second speaker, that our side strengthens trade networks. Before that, some housekeeping. Let's deal with that policy. They told us they will have foreign aid and multilateral donors like the IMF. This is simply unviable today for 3 reasons. First, the West is becoming increasingly unreliable and insular. The anthem of Trump's America is literally America first. And under Trump, the US has cut contributions to the IMF by 1/3. Furthermore, just look at the EU's financial woes in a recessionary climate, which is precisely why it has cut budgets for international aid by 10 billion euros. But second, even where Western aid is offered, it comes with highly restrictive conditionalities, so very few countries actually meet this criteria to receive aid. And this is odd, because the proposition we hear that strict externalities are actually a good thing because countries that don't deserve to get it, don't get it. I'm not sure who proposition is to dictate who exactly is deserving of it, who exactly should be deserving of living in poverty and who should not be able to do so. I think they need to prove to us why they can say that certain countries just don't deserve this aid. Furthermore, it's just not true that the IMF is always good. Look at Latin America and the crippling debt crisis that cripples it to this day. We think all of this shows that these are not actually viable alternatives. So, the reality proposition should stand for is one where without the BRI, millions of rural villagers across Asia and Africa will be mired in abject poverty because they have no one else to turn to.
Question.
So, first point rebuttal. What exactly is China like? We think this example method here is really symmetric because for every example of a Hrvatsko port, we can give you other examples of good projects. So the question to ask is incentives. And we argue, we completely agree that China is self-interested. That's why its interests converge with the people it's trying to help. For a few reasons. First, is desire for legitimacy, because many countries are very suspicious of this new BRI initiative. It's in China's interest not to confirm these suspicions by proving themselves to be sending these countries in debt. Second, China obviously prefers a world where trade partners are doing well, as opposed to a system of debt slavery, because it wants mutually beneficial trade deals with other flourishing economies. If China really wants to achieve a status of being an economic hegemon, it wants to be a big brother of a flourishing region, not a failing one, as your side claims would be. So we think clearly China's incentive to be good to these nations. Second question, about specific how to talk about. So the first one we talk about is about this whole idea of the debt trap. First, I'll tell you why you won't get money from any other countries. Second, that is not a debt, it's not an A part or a bad thing for governments. It's only bad when the interest rate is higher than that of the GDP growth rate of these countries. And we argue for a few reasons BRI is not a problem. Because first, it offers low interest loans. Second, because most of these countries that China is dealing with are experiencing rapid economic growth, that means they are able to pay these loans. And third, GDP growth is hugely helped by infrastructure projects that China builds. So this actually helps them to develop. Now I want to take down this shining bright example of Djibouti and Hrvatsko ports. First, it's not actually all that bad that China is operating a port for free for you, so it's really more like an offshoring agreement. But second, in any case, the fiasco in Hrvatsko has led other countries like Malaysia, Cambodia, and Thailand to renegotiate contracts on better terms with China. So there is already a self-correcting mechanism for all of their problems. The last point they bring to us is that China is repugnant, and therefore no one will want to crack down on them anymore. We think the question is, if China is so terrible, the question is when do we plug them into the global economy, and when do we have global scrutiny on their actions? That happens in our world when people on your side can criticize them for harmful actions they're actually engaging in. So we begin the crucial trade-off here. We think in the short term we will have less sovereignty in relation to China, but in the long term we have more sovereignty because we have more economic development on our side. First argument. However, the BRI creates economic development. Before I go on, yes.
Loans from China are on average 1,100% more expensive than loans from Japan. Which country do you think they should be taking loans
I mean, if you want to compare with the worst extreme examples, Japan is actually in recession right now, so I'm not sure why there's a better example for your side. Back to my case. We think the BRI creates economic development because it provides countries with money and expertise to build vital infrastructure. Collectively, China has funded more than 1 trillion yuan worth of projects, and subcontractors have branched out to participating countries to develop infrastructure. This provides two unique benefits. First, the process of construction is hugely beneficial because many Chinese construction firms employ locals, and therefore this helps locals by giving them jobs and expertise in fields like mining and excavation. Second, the final product benefits people on the ground because the transportation networks built with the BRI provides locals with jobs and money by plugging them into the global economy and improving local connectivity. So in Central Asia, the Eurasian land bridge connects cities in Kazakhstan and Belarus with markets in China and Europe. The BRI also involves the construction of vital infrastructure like energy grids and schools, and in Pakistan, power plants worth over $33 billion have been built to alleviate chronic energy shortages, so our side helps all of these people. And these economic benefits will simply be siphoned away by corruption, because Xi Jinping's entire domestic platform is based on a vehement anti-corruption narrative. Condoning corruption will only serve to undermine his legitimacy. So our side achieves economic development. Second argument about how our side prevents Chinese aggression. So let's take proposition at their highest and assume that China does actually have perverse incentives. These incentives will exist on both sides. The question is, how will China expand its influence? Without the BRI, China will resort to far more coercive methods. What would this look like? It may look like threats, threatening to impose sanctions, to cut off trade routes, to reopen border disputes. And in some cases, this may also involve military maneuvering,
Question.
so building air bases on reclaimed islands in the South China Sea or deploying Chinese platoons overseas. So if their concern is really about sovereignty, these outcomes become far worse on their side. So I suggest we win not just on economic development, but also sovereignty. So what is the comparative on our work? I think the BRI is better because there's a far more benign means of economic expansion. If anything, it creates a win-win situation where neighboring countries benefit from development as well. More importantly, China has no incentive to turn to more coercive means of expanding its influence, because methods like threats and military maneuvering are high-risk strategies because they sour relations, they invite conflict, they run the risk of superpower retaliation. China only has an incentive to turn to this high-risk strategy when low-risk strategies like the BRI are not available. So with the BRI, there is no incentive on our side comparatively to take on this risk. And to be clear, proposition can't simply ignore the nuance of this argument by claiming that China will use both the BRI and other means of coercion, because the BRI is what precludes these more coercive forms of Chinese aggression. So I suggest, if you really want to talk about sovereignty, our side actually protects this. But more importantly, we have the crucial benefits of economic development. Your first speaker conceded that it's not important, that some countries should not get this development. We think that's despicable. For all of these reasons, the Belt and Road Initiative builds a road towards progress. We stand very firmly in opposition.
From the very first minute of the first proposition speech in this debate, we have thus provided you with a very clear alternative mechanism to that of Chinese investment. And some opposition stand up and say, oh, well, that's just not good enough because their interest rates are too high. And we come back in PY and say that is factually inaccurate. States like Japan, in spite of a recession, are still able to offer interest rates that are far less predatory than those of China. But they continue to complain about the conditions. So this leads us to ask, what are the conditions that the IMF, that Europe, that America currently impose on the loans that China doesn't? Is it the interest rates that we've told you are factually untrue? Or is it the human rights conditions? Is it the environmental legislation? Is it the democratization targets that tell Chinese businesses, on the other hand, investing in Uganda, that propping up dictatorship is unacceptable, and that endorsing countries that criminalize homosexuality is unacceptable? We think it's the latter. That is my substantial contribution to the debate. Before I tell you about how these projects solidify the hold and power of dictators and liberal Republican leaders, I'm going to do two things. First, respond to the little responses that they gave to Arthur's 8 minutes of constructive material, and second, look about the two substantive arguments introduced by their first speaker. On the first of those things, Arthur tells you about how these projects are economically poor ideas for these nations. So for them to stand up and say, oh, the best way for you to find liberalisation in these nations is through economic means, it's just not good enough. Because we tell you structurally why these investments do not actually help people on the ground. What were those reasons? One, that factually, on a factual basis, the interest rates are higher and the practices are more predatory. They stand up and say that these are low interest rates. We say, one, that's just not true. But even if it were true, the reason they afford such low interest rates is they know that people are unable to repay the debt in the first place. And that is the point at which China seizes your sovereign territory. That is the point at which China puts a gun to your head and tells you to vote for them in the next UN election. But they didn't respond to arguments 2 through 4 that Arthur provided you in his first argument. Stuff about how only the strategic projects that China is interested in are the ones that go to completion. So Pakistan doesn't have schools being built. It has pipelines, it has roads, it has superhighways, crucially that only enable China, but that don't actually help local businesses, local producers. The third thing he tells you here is that actually in lots of these instances there is a one-size-fits-all approach. It means that this just isn't tailored towards the creation of individual schools in an area, it's more about headline infrastructural projects. No response there. But the last thing they stand up and say, the second argument we bring you is that of political influence. That China uses this to gain more power on the world stage, and that is on a principled level in this debate a bad thing. Their only response to this argument was to say, oh no, but if China gets more power on the world stage and more people can see the bad things that it's doing, then it's more likely to attract criticism. This is a bizarre argument. By the logic of this, they would be happy with China invading sovereign nations on the grounds that that would attract more criticism. We tell you that is exactly what they are doing, and they're doing it under the mask of one belt, one road. Finally, they say your mechanism in this debate isn't functional, because we have an isolationist America, we have a series of organisations like the IMF that are unwilling to give money. One, the example they give is that Trump's America cutting their overseas aid budget by $10 billion pales in comparison with the several hundreds of billions that it continues to give every year through all of the other back channels that the US is still operating through Congress. Second of all, that is one of 5 actors we outlined in our start of this debate. We're talking about the European Union, that even in the midst of several countries trying to leave, in 2018 will provide in excess of $150 billion. Don't talk to us about $5 billion cut here or there. So, what are the arguments they brought you in constructive? The first thing they say is that this helps the local economies to be plugged into the global economy. One, this is just such an unbelievably cut and paste argument to bring into this debate, specifically when they don't engage with Arthur's sophisticated analysis about one, these businesses don't employ local people, all of the money is exported, and two, the very predatory nature of these things means that China now owns your school, China now owns your port, China now owns your infrastructure, and taxes local people to use it. The second argument that they bring into this debate is that of this containing Chinese aggression. 2 responses here. The first is that this is just not true. In lots of instances, this is used as a pretext for expanding Chinese aggression. We point you to the example of Sri Lanka, where they literally stationed battleships outside of the port in order to seize it. We point you to an example like the South China Sea and small island nations there, where they have increased investment in these areas, but when they default on their debts, they use as a pretext to invade. That is crucially the comparison in this debate. So, before I move on to my argument about how these projects solidify the hold on power of dictators and liberal repressive leaders, I'll take what information if you have one. So, this happens in 2 ways. First, they entrench leaders through corruption. Note that, 1, the sprawling nature of this project, stemming literally the circumference of the globe, no thank you, and 2, the corruption that is endemic to the autocratic Chinese government, something they never responded to, means that many of these projects see conscious or more discreet embezzlement. This looks like leaders being allowed to siphon funds in these small nations, for example, the president of Kazakhstan, or them just being handed a fat money clip of cash by the Chinese government. Their only response, implicit in their first case, is to say, oh, well, the drive towards corruption in China is what, towards anti-corruption in China is one that is ongoing. But we tell you that the country has absolutely no democratic standards, that, as I'm going to tell you in a minute, has actively funded a number of dictatorships. This just doesn't stand. In countries that are struggling economically, cash is used by these leaders to prop themselves up. This looks like buying election results, bribing rivals, funding secret police forces. The best example we can point you to here is that of Kyrgyzstan, where in October 2017, the current president was handed $10 million of difficulty fees, quote unquote, by the Chinese government. 2 months later, he won an election described by the Democracy Project as, and I quote, containing almost unprecedented levels of vote buying. You do the maths on that one. The second way in which this entrenches dictatorship is that it entrenches leaders through personal association. There are 2 bits of context you have to understand for the project here. One, that the Chinese approach is one that exploits its own state-controlled media to outwardly construct close personal relationships with leaders of the nations in which it's investing. And it does this, no thank you, because it wants to prevent these nations from pulling out in the future. The second bit of context, and this is one we've already very thoroughly landed in this debate, is that these initiatives are trophy cabinet in nature. We're talking not about the construction of schools or hospitals, but big, sexy, headline-grabbing infrastructure projects that are very superficial. Bridges to nowhere, superhighways that literally just end in deserts, dams producing electricity in areas that have small populations. Before I tell you about what exactly that means for leaders, I'll take a POI.
So, to be clear, we made it very clear that China's interest is to boost their global trade. So why do you think they'll build bridges that lead to nowhere as opposed to plugging it into the global economy?
What we told you is that they do want to boost their global trade, but that is by providing infrastructure that is advantageous to them, often directly at the expense of local populations. So they, for example, build roads or build bridges or build railways through Central Asia, but do not allow local people to access them. What is the consequence of leaders being able to entrench their power through personal association? We think it means that leaders use these big headline-grabbing projects to distract from other issues like the constriction of personal freedoms. We point to the example of Uzbekistan, where in September 2005, a $1.5 billion port was funded by the Chinese government. And just 2 months later, the former interim prime minister was appointed, him by himself, president for life. These things allow leaders to take control of countries. But at this point, you're probably asking, what is the comparison we bring you on side proposition? It's one we introduced in the first minute of our first speech, and that is conditional loans. We tell you international institutions are far more frequently than China at attach liberalisation or democratisation targets, but specifically these are difficult for leaders to stomach at the moment. The best example we can give you of this aid being preferable in terms of human rights is Myanmar, when in the same week as the US government classified the acts against Rohingya people as genocide, the Chinese government built a bridge in Rakhine, the epicentre of abuse of those populations. If you think this policy is economically advantageous for those people in countries, maybe you're voting opposition. But it isn't, and that's why this debate should go wrong.
We think there is nothing wrong when countries choose to align themselves with China to stave off economic ruin. Unless you want to tell us that every single developing country involved in the BRI is run by a government that only wants to oppress its people, I think they have to admit that there is a reason why these countries are turning to the BRI. That reason is because they realize that the arrogance of the IMF and the lack of money coming from the West means that this is the best way for them to help their people. That is what we stand for. I want to talk about two things. First, politics. Second, economics. So let's start with politics. Now I want to point out that a lot of their arguments are not unique to China. Talk about China forcing you to vote in line with its interests in the UN. The US does it too. Like Trump literally said, I'll take note of who voted against my resolution in the UN. I would suggest Trump is even worse than China in this respect. Similarly, talk about the liberal government. Guys, the US literally gives weapons to Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia uses these weapons to kill insurgents and civilians in Yemen. Saudi Arabia literally legalized the right to drive after China. So I suggest the liberal governments being funded are equally a thing that happens with the US. In fact, I suggest that proposition has got it wrong, because development is what leads to more liberalization and less corruption in the long term. You can't take away liberal governments and then create development. You need development first. That is because development is what allows, for example, middle-class populations to get education and the social cultural capital they need to fight back against oppression. So it's precisely the arrogance of the IMF that stands in their case. The idea that first you must be liberal, then we give you money. That's the wrong way to go about liberalizing a country. They said we have to send for invading sovereign countries. No, because invasion takes away the sovereignty of other countries. Development increases the sovereignty of these countries. And if China invades these countries, no country will turn to the BRI. So the idea of how it's a pretext when they take away debt, when they station warships outside your port. If China does that, no country will join the BRI, and China won't be able to achieve any of its self-interested benefits. So I suggest that's just a weak rebuttal to our argument. More importantly, we told you the comparative is far more coercive. And no, their only rebuttal to our second argument is this whole pretext of stationing warships outside your port, which I've already taken down. They never rebut the core logic that all of these things, like threatening through military maneuvering, are high-risk strategies because they can invite retaliation from other powers and because they weaken China's reputation. China only does that when low-risk strategies like the BRI aren't available. So even on their best count of China having malicious incentives, it will be more coercive on their sides. All the harms about Djibouti and taking away sovereignty will be even worse when China actually sends troops in. So, more importantly, we think it's not true they are actually trading off huge amounts of sovereignty. Now, the second speaker likes to use that. It's just factually true that debt levels are smaller. Well, you know what? I think if the debt levels, for example, the interest levels were really smaller, then countries would just choose the IMF. They say the reason why they don't do it is because of corruption, and that's the only reason why it's not good. But first of all, we told you, China doesn't stand for corrupt regimes because Xi Jinping's literally, his entire push is about anti-corruption. Furthermore, development is what alleviates corruption because public sector workers only take bribes because they aren't paid enough. We alleviate corruption when we have development first on our side. More importantly, we told you that there are incentives for why China has no reason to mire countries in huge debt. And no, they will never actually deal with our structural incentives. How economically a debt crisis hurts China's trade prospects. How politically many participating countries have a bad history of colonialism with the West, so they're obviously a lot more suspicious. And if anything, all of their debacles of Angolan mines and Hamadoda port are precisely, as my first speaker said, the reason why countries are now renegotiating their loans. So it's a self-correcting mechanism against something the second speaker dropped. Another thing the second speaker dropped, he told you how it's not that bad when China runs your port for free, because the goods and services still flow through your country. So it's almost like they're actually benefiting you in a win-win situation. But let me deal with their best case, that countries are surrendering a huge part of their sovereignty to China. Our argument is that trading off some of the sovereignty in the short term to achieve economic development actually gives you more sovereignty in the long term. This is because there is no point being nominally sovereign if you aren't developed. Sure, you have the freedom to use money, but this is money you don't actually have. You have the freedom to stay your position at the UN, but everyone ignores you because the language of real politics is money and development, and no one talks to you when you're a small, undeveloped country. So the comparative is you would rather have a country that is rich and dependent on China than poor and independent of China, because you have less sovereignty in relation to China, but more sovereignty in relation to every other country, and more sovereignty in relation to your internal affairs, because sovereignty is equally about a government's ability to do what it wants within its country. Now that nicely leads me on to my second contention, therefore, on economic impacts. Before I go on, sure.
The reason countries take higher interest Chinese loans over lower interest international ones is that, as we told you, the international community demands functioning economies in which these loans can be effective.
Well,
why do you not give countries an easy way out in China?
Well, as I just told you, the reason why they accept it is because all of these conditions are backwards. They aren't actually a good model of development. I've literally told you why that's not true. But fine, let me give you a lot more reasons, alright? So the first is that Western countries just don't have spare cash lying around. There is slowing economic growth in the US, there is an aging population in the EU. China is literally one of the only countries with massive amounts of spare cash lying around. So the comparative is not EU and IMF loans versus China loans. The comparative is China loans versus no loans at all. Furthermore, we told you the EU is becoming increasingly insular. They said there are 6 actors. Yes, the point is there's a broad trend across the West of increasing popularism and the idea of increasing insularity. Maybe they can throw fancy numbers at us, but they need to give us structural incentives on how, just look at Trump, who says America first. Even if he has only cut a small portion now, in the next few years, he's going to cut a huge amount of portion from the US contributions. Finally, Western countries are less politically stable, they are less reliable. Look at Merkel, for example, who is struggling to put together a coalition. The fact they are struggling to put together stable governments is the whole reason why they don't have the political stability needed to give out loans to random countries. So the point is this, it is not a comparative that countries are taking Chinese loans because that is the only way to sustain corrupt governments. Countries are taking Chinese loans because that is the only way to get loans they need. We don't think it's true that these are not finished because the idea is how we have expertise through public-private partnerships. We don't think it's true that these are trophy cabinet projects, because if they were just trophy cabinet projects, people on the ground would be pretty unhappy with your government when your government is spending billions of dollars building a trophy cabinet that doesn't actually connect to their homes, and they would tend to overthrow the oppressive government if they were really so economically disenfranchised. My argument for today, therefore, is on how we strengthen global trading networks. A central claim here is that the BRI reinforces the global system of free trade. Why is this claim true? A key observation to make is that the BRI centers around creating trade routes in line with the original Silk Road. So they already admit there's overland corridors spreading out around China, maritime trade routes across China all the way to the Mediterranean. What China is doing is essentially massively subsidizing free trade between China and these countries, and also between these countries themselves, by building infrastructure that is essential to the transport of goods. This has a huge positive effect on global trade because it adds a new dimension to the global trading system. Currently, the main trade routes that exist in the world center around the USA. So we trade through the Atlantic and we trade through the Pacific to Europe, to Asia. However, this creates a new set of trade routes that don't center around the US, that link countries that were previously not plugged into the global economy. This is important, particularly at a time when the US is literally pulling out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. We think it's good when other countries like China take the mantle to preserve free trade. Why is free trade important? We think it's good because of the law of comparative advantage. And I know that's a very complex term. So simply put, it means that it's better when countries can produce goods that they are efficient at producing. Through free trade, they can obtain goods through trade that they are not efficient at producing, while domestically only producing goods that they are good at producing. Even if some jobs are lost, and we do sympathize with jobs that are lost through free trade, we think it's generally a good thing when goods and services flow through the entire world, because that means people in Central Asia can now get TVs, clothes made in Europe, for example, toys made in China, food grown elsewhere around the world, and we think that benefits them. At the end of the day, we understand that the Belt and Road Initiative builds a route towards progress. We are very proud to oppose.
Look, ladies and gentlemen, the road to economic development is a difficult one. It's one that takes time. It's one that requires your economy to be stable. It's one that requires things like corruption to be got rid of. It's one that requires things like democratization so that your markets can actually be free. That's why, when you look at countries like Eastern Europe 40 years ago, countries like Croatia, you saw that they were in similar economic conditions. Yet the IMF imposed those stringent conditions on them, and they're now prosperous countries. That's because we recognize that this process has to take time. And even if that road is a more difficult one, it's one that these countries have to take. Opposition supports a side that pretends a magical pill exists, where you can bypass that road and take it in 5 years. Problematically, that pill does not actually exist, and it's only in the interests of China and leads these countries into economic instability and leads them into downturn and into recession. We think the world we provide might be a little bit harder. Maybe you get a little bit less loans at the moment, but it's one that actually leads to long-term economic growth. I'm going to be looking at 3 questions, basically. Firstly, which side helps developing countries? Secondly, which sides improve democracies inside these countries? And finally, in which side does China's influence and expansion grow? On this first part, I'd just like to note the numerous lines of analysis from Arthur and Till that just went unresponded. We told you things about the fact they have an incentive to give loans to to countries that they know will not be able to repay them, so they can literally do things such as in their debt restructuring programs, they can do things such as get the rights to things such as putting in Chinese workers in all your buildings, to having Chinese contractors being the ones who are exporting it all. That's important because when they tell you, oh, you know, local people will gain loads of jobs and that's a road to democratization. Countries like Thailand have literally had protests in the streets because they realized that local people were not getting the jobs that our opposition tells you of, because they were all being held out to Chinese contractors. Thirdly, we told you that the projects China allows to succeed are ones that China wants to succeed. So we tell you that the roads that go from a Chinese-owned Angolan mine to a Chinese-owned port are probably the ones that do well. It's not the Colombian 4 billion dam that literally was built in an area that locals protested against because they knew that was prone to flooding. 2 years later, after China built that dam in Colombia, a landslide destroyed it and 26,000 people had to be evacuated. That's because realistically, that dam doesn't actually help China, and because they don't care of that project. That's why they don't spend money on making sure that these things are successful. But what do they tell you? They told us that China has an incentive to make sure these projects succeed. I just don't believe this is true, because if you think about it, prospering developing nations that are going to compete with China, undercut their markets, steal their share of global trade, is not something in China's interest. Why would you want the whole of Africa being able to compete in a market that you already dominate? So there's literally no reason for that. The real reason they do this is because they know that when they could do things such as giving loans to bad countries, they can exploit their natural resources. They can do things such as the Chinese palm oil companies in Malaysia, which have cut down 80% of the rainforest on the island of Borneo. That's because they know that's what helps them. They don't really care about the long-term prosperity of these countries. They care about exploiting them for every single last penny they can get and then leaving as quickly as possible, because realistically they don't care. And actually it's in their interest. What is the comparative we told you? We told you that the IMF doesn't want to steal your land. The IMF wants to have developing economies so that it can trade with them, because it doesn't have the same perverse and awful laws. That's because they often come from democratic nations, places like Japan, places like America, places like the Europe. So they are held by their people in the knowledge their country cannot go in and invade these countries and exploit them for all these resources. Even if we accept that there might be less loans, we think actually these loans are often cheaper, but far, far better for these countries. We think that is we think that's incredibly important under our side. Second point of clash then, before I move on.
You say that it's good when countries take up IMF loans because then they liberalize. Please deal with our analysis that the IMF loans don't exist on your side, so it's comparatively better.
I mean, the IMF loans do exist under our side. The IMF does just give out thousands of loans already. But what we say is the reason IMF loans aren't being taken up at the moment is because countries go to as my partner told you, feel like they can just go to China in this false promise that they will get to that short term with the less restrictions. Where if China didn't have the One Belt Road policy, they would be going to the IMF in a far, far better way. That's the comparative in this debate. Secondly, which side improves the democratic conditions in the country? So first of all, I'd just like to know, all their analysis relied on actually proving economic benefits of empowering local people, and when they tell you when people have economic growth, they can do things such as improving economic conditions. I'd also just like to note that this just isn't really true. I mean, if you look at the country we're talking about, China, a country that's seen the most economic growth in the past couple of decades, but it's still one of the most illiberal regimes, which still does things such as executes people, it still represses people in Tibet, it still has mock trials of people and represses democracy. It's just not true that the biggest example of economic growth actually leads to the democratization they want to tell you it does. And that's where edited material becomes so important in this debate. In that China is willing to prop up illiberal regimes and ignore them. It's willing to support things such as paying off corrupt officials with £10 million loans so that they can get those access to those ports, so that they can get into contractors. Because they don't really care about leading these countries to democratization because of the inherent nature. In fact, it's often an incentive to use the corruption that exists and support those very networks and do things such as supporting white elephant projects that allow it to get to those exclusive rights to those things. No, thank you. We think that's even worse. Finally, on which side of this debate do we think the expansion of China's global interests is better? We told you that actually China's global influence is hugely improved under this side. And that's why, in 2016, Papua New Guinea, for the first ever time, officially recognized China's legitimacy in the South China Sea. Weirdly enough, a year after it got some of the biggest loans from China ever, and also wasn't able to repay the interest. I wonder where that comes from. But the point here is, do you think China is more likely to invade the South China Sea when most of Oceania supports its legitimacy in that area, or when most of South China Sea doesn't so? I think that's a clear comparative that's far more likely. But their response is, this is a high-risk strategy for China, so why would they do it? First of all, just noting that it's a high-risk strategy is why it's incredibly unlikely that China will invade any of these countries. We think, if you just think about it, China invading most of Africa is just not going to happen. But if it does, the times when it happens is when it literally gets to station its destroyers in your own ports. Because weirdly enough, you don't own them anymore, and you can't even tax them because all the goods that go through them are awful. The second response here was that, Trump is presumably worse than China. I first of all note that Trump is the only actor we're talking about under their side. But also, we have structural reasons as to why we think Western nations like this better. Firstly, they have a democratic enforcement, which I've already mentioned, means they're far less likely to do things such as prop up dictators. But also, I think in general, most people believe that European nations are probably probably far more moral than China is, given all the things that I'm telling you about. But secondly, when we're talking about multilateral aid, they do not have the incentive. One country in the IMF cannot claim a port and land because it's not one country. That only exists when you have a sole provider of China. So the IMF literally could not do that because it's made up of loads of countries. Look, at the end of this debate, Prop wants to claim loads of benefits. But realistically, you have to realize that China is not looking out for the development of developing countries, because that doesn't actually help it. It doesn't actually help to have competitors pushing down its price and stealing its market share. What it cares about is stealing resources. What it cares about is building those mines with Chinese workers and not local workers. And at that point, any of their benefits fall out of this debate. Beg you to
Proposition states that liberalization is important because it guarantees human rights. Members of the House, this is a lie that Western countries have sold to us for decades. And after decades, it's very clear that there are still multiple countries that are clearly illiberal. And the reason why that's the case is because they refuse to acknowledge that the only way to ensure human rights is when people get money, because only when they have money and are educated can they really care about other issues that their side wants to talk about. So don't let them continue on with this lie that liberalization is a champion of human rights, because it has failed and it will continue to fail. I will ask two questions in today's debate. The first on economic development, and the second on political issues. Let's just talk about economic development. The main claim they told you very clearly is very simply that their side will not have any aid at all. They give you structural observations why this is the case. Things like, for example, how Western countries have no money now, or the fact that they are politically unstable. So when they say that Xi Jinping will stay in power for the next 10 years, I think that's a good thing, as opposed to individuals like Angela Merkel, for example, who might get elected out next year. Nick, they are only wanted to cause this, so to give us examples of when the IMF gave cash and tell us that it happened 11,000 times. Let's just note that if that was truly the case, then no one would choose a BRI on our side of the house. The reason why they chose a BRI is because for these countries, China was the only country that wanted to provide them with loans. Their next response to this was to tell us that it's okay because the reason why they don't get money is because they refuse to liberalize or follow other conditions like having women in the workforce, for example. Well, I think I acknowledge that it sounds good, for example, to have such conditionalities. But insofar as countries cannot fulfill them, then I think that having these conditionalities basically mean that countries on their side have no money at all. So I think that this is something that their side concedes. We also noted how their argument on how we are funding illiberal dictators or trying to harm human rights is not true. We do this for hypocrisy because the US does it as well. So this is a non-argument. Second, the question that both sides need to answer in this debate is a comparative. Which side best allow for human rights to exist? Is it on their side where they continue to refuse giving them aid, so there will be no change on their side, or on our side where when individuals get more educated, where when civil servants get more money so they don't need to be corrupt, are we really able to break out of corruption? So on this comparative alone, even on their grounds, we win this point as well. Let's just note on the comparative therefore is that there's no money on their side and money on our side. And again, this was a comparative that their first speaker has considered when they say that countries that don't accept these conditionalities deserve it. What does it mean when they say that these countries deserve it? Let's be very clear what we told you from first speaker. This means, for example, no energy and roads. And unfortunately, these are things that actually relate to people's human rights. When factories cannot operate, when individuals need to walk 20 kilometers just to get to the nearest hospital. All of these are harms that the outside concede to. We told you about how this also includes global trade and infrastructure. Their only response is that all of these are headline projects, or that they will just build roads to nowhere that only benefit China. A few observations to make here. First of all, if these roads lead to nowhere or they are really useless, countries don't agree to it either. I'm not sure why countries that accept the BRI on the outside are so dumb. Like, clearly it doesn't make sense. But second, trade benefits both sides as well. They want to claim that trade will only benefit China and that the trade routes will only go towards China. Again, a few observations to make. Airports clearly fly to every country on earth, not just China. Trading ports, again, lead you to every country. That's why Kazakhstan, an oil exporting country, for example, with the BRI, was able to build a new port in Baku to ensure that its shipping routes doesn't need to just go through Russia. So they're now able to export their oil to more countries. So I think one key observation to make is that global trade enables BRI countries to trade with everyone, not just China. Even if you said that only China, that countries only trade with China, that's a good thing. Because when countries trade, it's not exploitation where resources get out of your country. You get money back in return as well. Money and development are things that are important for people as well. So even if you concede that there's only trade with China, no thank you, there's a more realistic comparison of outside the house, that's good. Because when countries trade with China, they get money and development. That's also similar to how many countries are only relying on the United States for trade, for example. Not sure why this is a huge harm at all. But before I move on, sure.
Given that Ed gave you structural reasons why the investment in countries goes to the leaders and not to the people of those countries, why doesn't that help prop up repressive regimes as opposed to lead to education and liberalism?
First of all, if the money only goes to corrupt governments, people on the ground will be unhappy, in which case the policy will fail. Second, we told very clearly that we are willing to accept the trade-off, that perhaps some corruption will occur. But the point is that more individuals get more money, then are we really finally able to break away from corruption as a whole. Let's just move on to the other catchphrases they claim were structural reasons and deal with them as well. The first claim they made was that China knows that these countries will fail. That's why they gave the loans. Well, then I think that if that's the case, countries won't sign and agree on to a BRI. That's why I see observations in Malaysia, for example, in Thailand that they wanted to talk about, when protests on the streets and government awareness, when they didn't want to restructure deals with China over the BRI. These are all good things on outside the house, because we recognize that BRI is about the future of the BRI as well. And the future of the BRI, apart from one bad example of Hamagbota, does look good. Even though they're shining bright example of Hamagbota, we know that China operates these ports. However, the profits clearly still go to Sri Lanka. That's one. Second, when you trade with Sri Lanka benefits as well. Workers on the ground are hired. The next structural reason to also say that China doesn't hire these workers. Well, they do, because clearly it's very expensive to just ship many Chinese workers over to the African continent. But further, I think what's more realistic, as we told you from first speaker, is that there are Chinese subcontractors that are present as well, who hire Chinese local workers. It looks like, for example, the 14,000 kilometer long coastal railway in Nigeria, for example, where they hire over 20,000 local workers with Chinese subcontractors as we admit. So perhaps, and so this is crucial, we admit that there will be Chinese workers on our side, but there will also be local workers on our side of the house. But crucially, the presence of Chinese workers and Chinese economies means that there's a structural incentive for them to ensure that these businesses and developments don't go bankrupt as well. If your roads and bridges, if your shipping ports collapse, for example, that means that countries like China cannot trade with these countries anymore. So there's no incentive for them to build falling bridges and destroy ports altogether. But before I move on, sure.
Because Chinese companies aren't bound by the same conditions as international ones are, why are they not more likely to do things like exploit the environment exactly as they did with 80% of the Malaysian Borneo rainforest?
Well, first of all, I told you that these things already be restructured, so that this pushback, I don't think that countries that see the BRI are completely have no ability to trade at all. Surely they are able to renegotiate deals as well. I gave you structural reasons why there's pushback right now. Your side needs to acknowledge this. Let's move on to the last idea about their IMF loan conditionalities being very nice. Let's just know that Indonesia in 1997, the structural assistance plan that Indonesia got actually harmed the country. So if you talk about Croatia, for example, I think for a vast majority of circumstances, that's just not true. But even as a comparative, we know that our side is better, because unlike the IMF, as a global body, there's no incentive to care about the success of the countries. On our side, China has an incentive to ensure that these countries benefit as well. Let's move on to the last idea of politics. The main argument in the first speaker was that countries that China will just buy votes from the global economy in order to win over votes in the United Nations. Let's just though that all countries do this as well. I think if your country is next to the United States or dependent on the US for trade, like for example the French Polynesian Islands, you equally will vote for the United States as your bid to fail. So I think that this argument makes no sense on their side of the house. What is more important, however, is our argument on Chinese aggression. This takes them on their best case scenario, because we acknowledge that even if we accept all their ideas about how China is evil, for example, the question is how do they become more evil? On our side, all they can do is to have signed trade deals, for example, so that they get some benefits from trade. On their side, they get completely harmed at all. At the end of the day, let's just recognize that their side never dealt with any of our arguments to show why structurally China has an incentive to improve. At the end of the day, we recognize that the Belt and Road Initiative builds a route towards progress we oppose.
Proposition talks a lot about democracy, but if they listen carefully, from first speaker we had two responses. First, we told you we like democracy because it protects choice. What truly takes away choice is when people on the ground don't have money and don't have jobs. Second, and this is important, you know when people care about democracy, you know when people care about the environment, you know when people care about fighting corruption, when they already have jobs and their basic needs are fulfilled. So they push a lot about democracy, but they never actually tell us how they achieve all of these good outcomes. And it's far too late if Prop Reply wants to come up and be the first speaker on their side to actually show us the link. So I want to talk about the two worlds that emerge at the end of this debate and tell you how the world of proposition harmed these countries. Note that every single one of the benefits, the environment, fighting corruption, liberalization, every single one of the benefits stand on the idea of accepting IMF loans. In that regard, it's a bad strategic move that they never actually deal with the reasons why we tell you that they won't accept IMF loans. A, because there are simply not enough of these IMF loans. Literally, we give you so many structural reasons. A lack of political stability in the West, the fact that the West has no money, the fact that the West is becoming increasingly insular, or no response that show you why the IMF loans won't exist that they stand for. In that case, all of the liberalization and environmental regulations won't exist. We told you, more importantly, even if these loans exist, countries won't get them. Like I don't get it. If the government is really so corrupt and determined to preserve its corrupt nature, then it just won't accept the IMF loans and won't reform. So again, as we told you right from first, all of their benefits won't occur because even if IMF loans exist, countries won't accept them. Again, it's far too late if Prop Reply is the first to respond to all of these structural reasons. More importantly, we told you, even in their best case of the case, where they do accept IMF loans and IMF loans exist, we told you how their work penalizes countries. We think sometimes the liberal arrogance of the West is what causes countries to end up doing bad things. We literally, from first speaker, mind you, give you an example of the Latin American debt crisis, when IMF structural adjustment programs mired people in decades of debt. They talk a lot about debt because it's factually untrue that the West causes debt. I can easily say it's factually untrue that the IMF loans are good. More importantly, we told you in their work, many of the harms are symmetric. The idea of propping up liberal governments, we push them, they did not respond to their own argument. The idea of how you, literally the US props up corrupt governments, like Ferdinand Marcos in the Philippines, literally again, no response on their side. So to be clear, at the end of this debate, they have not told us why it is okay to wait. Why it is okay to wait when people live without electricity, when they live without jobs, when they live without roads, when they live without highways, when they live without money. We told you that it's far too late if Prop Reply wants to be the first speaker to tell us why it's okay to wait. What then is the world of opposition? We gave you structural incentives of China, and again, note that this was not actually dealt with on key proposition. From first, we told you, if China really wants to achieve the status of an economic hegemon, it won't want to be the big brother of a failing indebted region. It has an incentive to ensure that the region it is lording over is prosperous and flourishing. And mind you, the US has the same incentive not to have Africa compete with it. So their new response in first speaker doesn't really stand because the US probably also doesn't want Africa to compete with it, particularly when Trump runs on the platform of America first. Literally, we told you, our side is the side that ensures that countries get the money they need for development. In our world, that is when countries are able to get money that allows them to build jobs. And we give you, again, structural reasons why it won't just be trophy cabinet projects, why it won't just be highways that go from one Chinese mine to another, why there is an incentive for China to ensure that global trade flourishes. My second speaker's argument, which mind you they didn't actually properly respond to, on how we ensure we preserve free trade, that means that people in Central Europe get clothes, get food, get jobs, get products that all of us take for granted, but many of them don't have. We think the most pernicious line in that case is that some countries don't deserve development, that some countries don't deserve to get aid because they are bad and illiberal. We think that punishes people on the ground, and what we do is ensure that people on the ground get the money they deserve. We understood on our side that the Belt and Road Initiative builds a road towards progress we are very proud to oppose.
Side opposition can't win this debate because they did not have this debate. They did not accept the factual realities of the Belt and Road Initiative as it plays out in real life. The existence of it crowds out the billions and billions of dollars of funding in loans available from other international organisations. That the overwhelming majority of projects, in the words of their first speaker, exist to enhance Chinese influence and not to provide benefits for local people. That the overwhelming majority of projects in Kazakhstan, in Uzbekistan, in North, South and Sub-Saharan Africa are not provided for by local people, but are constructed by Chinese workers flown in their millions. It is because they did not rebut or engage with the realistic characterization of what this policy looks like. The headlines that every member of this audience has seen over the last 6 months, that they can't win. 2 questions, conveniently engaging with their third speaker's points of clash: economics and politics. On economics, we told you Chinese loans are awful. The first thing we said was that they amount to loan sharking, a predatory practice whereby they give you a loan and you have to pay them interest. They build a project for you with their own workers or subcontractors, if the third speaker would prefer to call them that. And then when you can't pay back that loan, because they've given you way too much money than you can actually afford, they now own the road, and by the way, they're going to tax you to use it. The only response they had to this, was in their third speech by the way, was to say, if this is the case, why do these countries pursue this policy? That ignored all of the sophisticated analysis we brought you in first and second about how Uganda, Pakistan, Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan are not known for their high rates of democratization. In fact, these decisions are taken by executives that are not accountable to the people and who make them anyway. But even if that weren't true, the trophy cabinet nature of these projects, building big, sexy bridges rather than building schools, than building hospitals, than investing in humanitarian crises, that distracts people. But perhaps most problematically for them, we also told you about foreign workers. We also told you about only 30% of these projects actually completing because those are the ones that are in Chinese interests. The railway that goes through Uzbekistan that locals are taxed to use and therefore priced out of. The only thing they had in response to this was to say, but we bring economic benefits to local people. And I'm not kidding. This analysis reached peak sophistication when they said airports enable people to fly anywhere in the world, ignoring the fact that 90% of the flights will be to China and the cost of the tickets available at these airports will be elevated because China will tax locals to use them. But they realised they were losing this issue and tried to make the debate about something it just wasn't, whether this was a choice between no loans or Chinese loans. And they did this all down their bench. First, we said this is factually untrue. The EU gives 140 billion a year, the US 100 billion a year, in 2 years into the Trump administration, the IMF gives thousands of loans. They accused us of throwing numbers out because they were just lying to you, ladies and gentlemen. The second thing they said is, if this is true, people wouldn't use the Belt and Road Initiative. But we told you, one, the very presence of the BRI and the fact that it has such predatorily low interest rates crowds out other opportunities. No response to that. But perhaps most importantly, we tell you some of the least democratic, most repressive nations in the world are siding with this because they don't ask the probing questions. That was what you brought me in second, and they never engage with on a sophisticated level. They don't ask about your human rights violations. But second of all, on the politics of this debate, we told you in two separate ways how this entrenches dictators, because it gives them money and allows them to hide and cloak domestic issues through superficial infrastructure projects. The only and most sophisticated response to this was to say China wants to distance itself from corruption. Yeah, Xi Jinping, the now president for life, has no quibbles around the distances himself from corruption. But we also brought you argumentation to suggest that this exacerbates Chinese influence in the world. They wanted to call this an argument about free trade. But it's not free trade if China owns all of your ports, all of your airports, all of your railways. Lastly, they throw out an argument about, by the way, that they don't revive in the third or reply, about military exacerbation. We tell you military exacerbation is so much more likely when these investments are used as a pretext for 21st century colonization of other countries. Very proud to refer.